All right, so I always like doing just let's keep it casual. I'm not going to run a full PowerPoint presentation. Let's just kind of chat over this. But we want to talk a bit about academic integrity as a whole, and then talk about Unicheck, which is a free, already built into Canvas, honestly, really simple to use plagiarism detector. And then we're going to talk about Honorlock, which is not free, but is available to you. I mean, it's the college has to pay, not you, just to appear. Roland's not going to have to write a check for $58 after each test or something like that. But it is a paid one. The college pays per user, and it's a little bit more onerous, and we'll talk about that, whether or not it's a good fit for you or not. But what I want to do is just real quickly talk about academic integrity as a whole here. So I would really recommend, I'll be honest, I'm in the middle of it. I have not finished it, but it was recommended to me by a couple of my compatriots at other colleges. The book Cheating Lessons, Learning from Academic Dishonesty. And what James Lang here does is he lays out 4 reasons that people cheat. Okay, or more accurately, 4 reasons why you see increased cheating, because people may cheat for a variety of reasons, but there's 4 conditions that he found really lend itself to why people cheat. Number 1 is an emphasis on performance. So you have been in Roland's class. Sorry, Roland, I'll pick on someone else next time, I promise. But you have been in Roland's class, and Roland says, you're going to have all this knowledge, and I'm going to stare at you for 60 minutes at the end of class or at the end of the quarter, and you're going to have to perform for this 60 minutes by, whatever the function is. Maybe it's multiple choice quiz or a test or an essay, but there's an emphasis on that 60-minute block of time where the other, how many weeks are we? 12, 10, depending on the quarter, that 9.9 weeks are ignored at that point in time and all the work they've done. If there's high stakes, writing on the outcome. So all of you at least have some high stakes. People want to pass the class, people want to graduate, but you can see it happen more in classes where, for example, in fire services, where promotion might depend upon passing the class or getting a certificate. Or you might see it in nursing, where your ability to get into the program, you have to have that license, you have to pass a test. Stuff like the SAT, GRE, things like that. You see a lot more there where it's like you either do or don't get into college, you do or don't get a pay raise in that. The third is if there's an extrinsic motivation for success. So I promised I'd pick on someone besides Roland. This is where basically the person's only reason for doing well on this test or on this assessment is because Nancy says we have to do it. Okay. Sometimes that's all there is. Sometimes Nancy says, sorry, you have to take this test. But if that's the only thing going on, we see a higher incidence of it. And then the fourth one is a low expectation of success. If people think that they're going to do poorly, they're more likely to cheat. If I've done my prep work, if I'm prepared, if I've got this quiz and I'm pretty certain I'm going to do well, I'm much less likely to cheat than if it's, oh, these tests are so hard, or I'm not prepared, or hope this doesn't happen. The teacher's done a really lousy job of preparing for us, and I have no idea what this quiz is going to be. Okay, so I just want to pause for a brief second. I know we're on a 28-minute clock, so we're not going to take 20 minutes of discussion here. If we're in a longer one, we would, but just ask you to reflect on that a bit. Think of your assessments that you do, whether they're quizzes, whether they're essays, whether it's shop work, and say, okay, how many of these do I have in the majority of mine? And maybe start thinking about that. We're going to talk about the opposite of that in a second, but kind of think through that. Okay. And the real takeaway from James Lang's book here isn't this is why cheating happens, and it's definitely not here's how to stop it, although there are elements of that, or I should say reduce it. The real point of his book is if you take steps to reduce cheating by taking on these 4 things, you're going to improve academic performance. Okay, so if you measure people over the course of a quarter, they're going to be engaged over the course of a quarter versus where they know that there's a final on the last day. I tell the story to everybody about my daughters because I don't want them to hear it, but I took an econ class and I knew that it was a final exam only was the grade. So I didn't even buy the book until the last week of the quarter. The day before, this was back when I was insane, please don't do this, took the shrink wrap off, read the first 8 chapters of my econ book and got a B on the final and a B in the class. Okay, please don't do that, and don't tell my kids that I did that. But if that's the way that the class is structured, you're obviously inviting more academic dishonesty. Okay, so let's look at the opposites of that. Instead of an emphasis on one-time performance, we assess over the course of the quarter. Instead of high stakes on the outcome, 3 quizzes, each of them 1/3 of your grade. What are different ways that I can do it? Maybe it's weekly quizzes, maybe it's part quizzes and part lab work. I love, Brian told me about this, and some of you may do the same thing, but I love what Brian Parker does every week. And this is something that really reduces academic dishonesty. He has a quiz. It's 10 points. He doesn't care if they cheat or not. I mean, he cares, but he really, at the end of the day, doesn't care. That's to check and see that they have a pulse, that they're alive, that they understand basic concepts. And then later on in the week, they have a 100 or 150 point project that they're working on. That's a great example of a low stakes assessment. Okay, most people aren't going to risk cheating, being thrown out of college over a 10-point quiz. They might, again, if it's a third of their final grade. So multiple assessments, variety, make them as low stakes as possible where that is possible. Okay, the third one, explain to them repeatedly the value of this assessment. I know a lot of you guys are great teachers, so I know that you do this. You say, hey, I know this is boring work. I know everybody hates it, but we have to learn this before we go on. In fact, some of you, I'm sure, even do the thing where in like week 8, you go, hey, remember in week 1 where we did that stuff that you guys all hated and everybody swore at me? Now we're actually going to use this. Look at how much easier week 8 is going because we did that thing in week 1. So as much as possible, you're saying, here's why we're learning it. Here's why you're being assessed on it. And yes, you want to get a job and you want good pay is absolutely one of those things. But if we can add additional things, it's even better. Okay. And then our fourth one, there's a low expectation of success. Just a simple question. Are you preparing the students for success? And most importantly, in a way that works for them? I've heard instructors go, man, my students bombed the test. They shouldn't have. We reviewed the test before class. Well, the follow-up question is, how did you review it? It could be that you have lazy, stupid students. That's always a possibility, but it could be that you reviewed it in some way. Maybe it was, doing it orally. Maybe it's doing it on the board. Maybe it's making people work a problem one at a time that wasn't working for your students. So be open to trying different ways of preparing them in a way that works best for your students. And a lot of you have been doing this for years, if not decades, and man, doing peer review works fabulous, or having the students work the problem out individually or offering a practice test is a great way. Okay, so that's our little chatty chat about academic integrity. I'm gonna skip our next slide and just go straight to Unicheck because we're a third of the way through. So I'm trying to stay on time on this. So Unicheck is our plagiarism detector. The good news is it's in Canvas automatically. So we're going to show you in a second, but for those of you who want to just kind of get your reading overview, you turn it on for an assignment, and the key is it has to be a text box or a file upload, which makes sense. Okay, it can't do a plagiarism check on a web link or a video that they submit or something like that. So if you think of it as, okay, it's got to have some text in there, that makes sense. So you turn it on, the students go, they are going to have to do an attestation, which says, I forget exactly, but it says, I certified that this is my own work. They have to check that box, and then they submit their assignment. If you allow them, and I would really recommend this unless you have a good reason not to, and sometimes there are, they can access their own report. Okay, in fact, you can even create a draft one where they can submit it and check it. So Roland, for example, the one that you talked about, where they have basically one paper to do, you could set up a draft assignment where they submit it, they can run it through Unicheck and see how it scored, and then go back and submit it a second time. Or they can just submit it afterwards and resubmit it. But you can allow them to see and go, man, this is 80%. This gets to one of the key things of academic integrity. The goal is not to catch your students. Okay, that may happen, but that's not the goal. The goal is for us as instructors to train our students to understand what academic integrity is, to understand how to quote things properly, to understand how to do your own work. And that's really the ultimate goal. I mean, yes, sometimes we want to zap them and go, aha, I Googled your answer and I caught it. And that happens, and that's unavoidable. But the much better outcome is for that student to submit the essay, look at it and go, oh, I didn't realize that, and then go back and reformat it or recite it or delete that paragraph and write it in their own words, but do something where they're teaching themselves what that looks like, again, rather than somebody just getting their cattle prod and going, ha, gotcha. Okay, and then at the end, when they've submitted it, you get your report with an originality score, which says, here's the stuff that seems to be unique. Here's the stuff that seems to come from other sources. And it will then give you the list of sources. So if you have, now is the winter of our discontent up here, you're going to end up on, Shakespeare.com or something like that, saying, hey, this is actually from this source here. Okay, so let me switch. All right, so setting it up is actually really simple. So does everyone see assignments here? Okay, so we do it the same way. We click on assignment, give it a name, Unicheck Live, type your words in there, give it your points. Again, all the same thing, assignments, nothing has changed. By the way, in case someone was going to ask this question, this doesn't interfere with any functionality. So you can still do groups, you can still do peer reviewing, you can still do due dates. All the functionality of Canvas is still available. And let me scroll up here. You'll notice down here it says plagiarism review, which is what we're going to get to in a second. That's because I have one of these two boxes checked. Notice when they're not checked, it vanishes. Or if I checked, media recordings or paper submission. But as soon as I click file uploads or text entry, the plagiarism review comes here. All you have to do is click Unicheck. Okay. For those of you who are new, I wouldn't touch any of this. It's going to work just fine for Joe Average Instructor. If you're somebody like, Elizabeth Sherman or Peter Spielman, who are teaching a high-level English class, they might want to dial this in. And after you get more experience, you can do stuff like, okay, I want it to ignore things with this many words or this %, but these are the default settings they recommend. And for those of you who don't want to mess with this, it works fine. So what it says very quickly is it's going to take this paper that a person submitted and put it in the Bates library. That seems a little weird, but what that actually does is that's something designed to prevent people from cheating from class to class or quarter to quarter or year to year. We had an instance of cheating in one of our programs where it was passed from year to year because departments tended to come here. So, the 2021 person would go talk to the 2018 person and submit their paper in some cases. So that's what this would do, is now that 2018 paper is in the library. So it's not just checking the internet, it's checking previous submissions in Nancy's class. Okay, so does that make sense to everybody? That's kind of the big one. And again, I would leave that on unless the only reason you wouldn't want to do that is the draft assignment that we talked about. So if you create a practice one for people to submit, you don't want someone submitting their essay and then 2 days later submitting another essay that's going to compare it to the essay they submitted 2 days ago. Again, it's not going to flunk them automatically. It's just going to make your life harder because the whole paper is going to be highlighted and say this matches this paper back here. Okay. You want it to exclude quotes. If somebody puts a quote in there, then it's not going to count that as part of its similarity score. It's going to say that's a quote. I'm going to whiz past it and look at the actual original content. Same thing with references. It recognizes references. Okay. And then you can actually exclude certain sources, like if it has less than 5 words, less than 10 words, something like that. And this is the one I wouldn't touch until you've spent a lot of time in there and said, yeah, this seems to be not working right for me. It's good default settings. And then everyone sees the show report to students. And you have your choices here. Again, unless you've got a good reason to, and I know that there are, I would put immediately there. Why not give the students the opportunity to go in and check and see what their score is? And we'll show you how to do that in a second. If for some reason you don't, you can say after it's graded or after the due date or never. You have that capability. Okay. And then other than that, we click on save or save and publish, and we're good to go. We've now created Unicheck Live. It's available to our students and it has it built right into it. Okay, so let's switch over. And let me find that. Here we are. So now we're on the student perspective. This is a student in my class. They will go to assignments and they will see Unicheck Live. So they click on it. And they click on start assignment. And this is text entry or file upload. So I'm going to upload a file. And let's see. Oops, desktop, there we are. Unless you guys want my chicken burrito bowl recipe, we'll do this one instead. All right, and notice when I click on submit, it won't let me. It says you must agree to the submission pledge. And you'll see it says right here, this assignment submission is my own original work. 2 reasons for that. One of them is just letting them know. It's a heads up. Hey, this is being checked. So, hey, if you've cheated, you might want to think twice about it. The other thing is the studies have shown is just making people say that, attest to that, you know, even putting it up before a test does actually decrease instances of academic dishonesty. Okay, so once I do that, I click on submit. And unless it's some sort of gargantuan file, it's going to take a couple of minutes tops in order to do that. So what your student can do is go to grades. And you'll see right down here, there's a little clock which says it's running. I'm not going to hit refresh 15 times for 30 seconds or a minute that it takes to go. I'm just going to go up to previous one. And we'll talk about these colors in a second. So this is what your student will see, these flags here, which range from perfect in this case to possibly problematic. All right, and does everybody see the report here? And when the student looks at this, they're going to say, yeah, there's no issues here. You know, it's highlighting some of these, you know, click or tap here to enter text. That is not, in fact, a copyright Tim phrase, you know, so there's no issue with that. You know, SMART goals, definitely no issue with that showing up in there. I don't need to credit that to anyone. Okay. And so we can go through here. And if we said, how come this is here? Again, this is common verbiage. This shouldn't be setting off any alarm bells, but they can actually go look at it and go, okay, what does this compare to and where did it come from? So they can kind of decide on their own if they feel that, okay, I don't feel that that's plagiarism. I just happen to have 8 of the same 10 words as this random thing out there. Or, oh, this is problematic. That was actually a site that I visited. I should go back and redo that. All right. So any questions on that, either from the teacher or instructor perspective?
So when you open that up and look at that comparison, can you go to that website and see exactly where that came from and how it looks there?
Yes, it will show it and highlight it exactly. It'll be side by side. Let me see. Let me switch over real quick to the instructor version. Speed grader. And yep, I've got an 11%, which is good. That's why it's green. And if I click on that flag there, it pulls up the report. All right, and does everybody see that? Okay, and so yeah, I can actually pull this. And yes, this is plagiarized in the sense of, and I put it up on top, US Department of Education. This is coming straight from the United States Department of Education, so it should be highlighted. And if I click on this compare button over here, it'll pull them up side by side. So Roland, great question. It's going to show you on the left, you see my form. On the right, you see exactly where that came from. And you have the ability to judge it. Again, it's not going to flunk anybody or anything like that. It's going to flag it so you can go look and make your decision. All right. Thank you. All right. So let's get to our last one real quickly. Just your color coding. If you see, oh, that's right. I'm not sharing, am I? All right, so if you see your colors or your students are going to ask you what the colors are, you can share that with them. I'm sending this PowerPoint out, so you will have that for you. You know, blue means it didn't find any. You know, green, you're in great shape. Yellow, you definitely are going to want to go look at it. And if you get into that orange and red, you've got some issues unless there's a good reason for getting that. Okay, but that gives the students just kind of a very simple flag. You know, and they'll also see it if they look at their report. This says it matched something, the orange colors, the blue says to quote, The purple says the reference, and we're not going to talk about that last one other than it's a thing to prevent students from replacing like O's with Cyrillic O's in order to beat the plagiarism detector. And we'll stop at that. But there's all sorts of ways that people try and beat it. That's one of them, is replacing text. And so this is designed specifically to say, hey, someone's trying this. All right, so let's talk about Honorlock. So the bad, there is bad to Honorlock. And any online proctoring service. The bad is, for some students, it really creates a negative environment. It's adversarial. A lot of students interpret this as, Brian thinks that I'm a cheater. Okay, that may not be Brian's intent, but be aware that students are going to interpret that way. It's very high stress for some students. They're having, depending on the boxes you check, they're having to hold their driver's license or ID up. They're having to take their camera or their computer and do a 360-degree scan of their room. They may not want to share that information. Think about somebody who might be homeless, living in a car, rooming with 4 other people in a studio apartment. So there's definitely some downsides to it, from your student's perspective. I don't have time to show the video, so where it says cringe, I would strongly recommend Googling racist soap dispenser, and you can see a 1-minute video of a soap dispenser, which works for a white person who puts their hand under it and doesn't work for a black person who puts their hand under it. I don't have video of that happening in Unicheck, but there absolutely are reports from colleges in our state where that has happened to Black students, where they've had to do extensive ID verification because the algorithm didn't recognize them. So again, that's something to be aware of. Think about how you would feel as an instructor. I mean, first think about your student, but as an instructor, if your student came and said that happened to you, and the damage control you'd have to do. So I've slagged on Honorlock. I understand that, but do be aware that it does have a place, but understand that this is a intense thing that you're doing. So please don't do it for 5-point weekly quizzes. It's not really a good thing for that. But yes, if you're in nursing and licensure, depending upon it, nursing program uses it, fire service uses it, some programs use it. Just be aware that this is kind of what you're signing up for. Okay. All right, so let's go to here and show you how to use it. My apologies. I think we're going to run a couple of minutes late. We've ended 11:58 every time, but we started a little late. I think, I hope you guys have the grace to give me like an extra 3 minutes on this. We will get through it. Okay, so the first thing is you have to have Honorlock enabled. It's the same thing you always have. If it's not there, go into your settings and navigation and make sure that it's enabled in your class. So we'd go right here into navigation. Okay, but if you go to Honorlock, it's hard for your students, and we talked about that, but it's incredibly easy for you to turn it on. So all that you do is you click on the honor link, and these are all of my quizzes. It does have to be a classic quiz. It will not work with new quizzes, so do be aware of that. Okay, so you go to your quiz and you just click on enable, and then all you do is you choose what you want to turn on and off. So you go through and say, I do want to record using a webcam. I don't want to record the screen. I do want them to have to show a student ID. Okay. I don't want them to be able to print it. I don't want them to be able to copy and paste. So you can go through and decide, just go through your settings and decide. And I'll be happy to walk through it with you if you have any questions about a specific question or best settings. You also can give some students some things like, Roland talked about open book. You can make it an open book test. You can make it so they're allowed to use calculators. You can allow them to wear headphones. Again, if you've got strong feelings on this, great. My recommendation would be try and make it as untraumatic for your students as possible. So I'd put as few of these as possible on there. You can give very specific accommodations for an individual student, like, John, like let's say you didn't allow headphones, you could put a thing that, let's say Johnny has an accommodation or shared to you that he does better with headphones on to block out the noise. You could type in right there, Johnny's allowed to wear headphones. Okay. And then all you do is click on enable. Once you've done your settings, Okay, and you'll now see that readiness survey is open. Okay, and that's really it. What the last thing I want to do now, which is why we're going to go a couple of minutes over, sorry, but it's really important, is to kind of talk about it from a student perspective and some best practices for you. Number one, above everything else, is talk to your students. Okay, explain to them if you're going to do it, why you're going to do it. Listen to their feedback. There are a whole bunch of internet threads, a lot of them on Reddit, for example, about uprisings at Florida State University, and I think Michigan and a few other places, about students just, up in arms. And Cameron just said he's not a fan of it. And like I said, I understand. There's some legitimate objections to this, the privacy settings. Okay, but talk to them about it in advance. One thing you can do is if you go into Honorlock, you have this thing that says add a practice exam. And I've already added 2, but what the heck, I'll do it again. So you can add a practice exam, and there's no charge for that, by the way. So your students can take it as many times as they want just to get used to the Honorlock interface. Okay, so that's available for them. Let them know in advance. But a few things that, again, you need to be aware of. They have to have Chrome, because it's a Chrome extension that it adds. They're going to have to add the Chrome extension before they take the test. They can uninstall it as soon as it's done. Unlike some of the other ones that actually require hard install, this does not. It's only a browser extension that it does, which is one of the reasons we've gone with Honorlock. Is it's the least onerous of all of them. It's not a permanent install. It doesn't monitor as much as others. Unlike Proctorio, it doesn't have an insane CEO who gets in flame wars with people who challenge him and post chat logs, which he's done. So, if you have to have one, Honorlock is, we think, the best one by far to have for that. So your students will have to do that. Then they'll log in. When they click on the test, it's going to either tell them go ahead, or it's going to say you need to install the browser extension, and then they'll take it. The nice thing is it doesn't flunk anybody or kick anybody out. It's just flag stuff. So at the end of the day, Brian sits down and it's going to say, hey, you should look at Johnny's student at 22 minutes. There was a lot of noise when he was taking the test. Then Brian can look at it and go, oh, that was Johnny's student who had a kid who's staying at home because of coronavirus, who decided that he wanted to watch Thomas the Tank Engine at loud volume. I'm assuming you don't want to flunk him for that, right, Brian? Okay. On the other hand, Brian may look at it, it may be a student going, hey, what's the answer to number 7? C, thanks. Okay, then obviously you're going to want to deal with it at that point in time. So you're going to have the ability to go over it and look at it. Okay, so that again kind of gives everybody the quick overview of it. We didn't go in depth in it, and we weren't planning on it. So if you have specific questions about how can I use Honorlock, how can I use Unicheck, what are the best settings, what documentation do you have for the students? We've got all that information. We'll be happy to send it to you, but didn't want to drown everybody with a whole bunch of stuff. We want to just keep it at this is here. And, like, for example, if Cameron says, no way, drop dead, I hate Honorlock, great. Bye, Cameron, have a nice day. No problem with that. If you say, yeah, it's a little tough, but I think I need it given my situation, then let's have a second conversation about how to do it. But at least now you guys are familiar with that. Okay, so any questions from anybody? Nope. Okay, thank you, Cameron. I appreciate your kindness. You're a good egg and much better than me. So you guys are already entered in our random drawing. So we've got that Grubhub gift certificate I'm going to draw on Friday afternoon. If any of your peers are interested in this, we'll make the YouTube video available later today so they can watch it as well. They just have to shoot us an email saying that, hey, I've watched this. But other than that, hopefully one of you awesome and wonderful people will get an email saying, here, you can bring some actual wings next Wednesday. Okay. Other than that, my apologies for going a little late. We really try and make it 11:58, but we just got a little behind today and I didn't want to just drop it off the agenda. But have a great day, everybody. We will talk to you later.